Hey there everyone, welcome back to Dark Souls 2. My name is Tom, and we are still here at the Shrine of Bananas. And that's because we still have this door to get past. Now, to open this thing, you need to be undead, as I am now. I just went back to Majula and just jumped off the cliff. Pretty much the easiest way to do it, other than walking off the top of this tall tower. So this episode, like I said last episode, will probably be a bit longer, so it'll be maybe like 45 minutes, 50 minutes. Depends on how heavily this is edited. But that should be the running time for this episode because we are very close to finishing the game. This episode will be dedicated to getting through the Undead Crypt and defeating Velstart. And then after that, we will be continuing on to Aldier's Keep and the Dragon Eyrie, Dragon Shrine, and then back to do the Giant Memories. And then after that, we'll pretty much be done. So we only have about 3 or 4 levels to go after this, and the Dragon Eyrie is completely skippable now, which is a little weird. Like, I don't know why they would mulligan an entire area and make it so you don't even have to do it. You can just zip line all the way across to the other end. But, I don't know, whatever floats their boat. So, let's continue on with what's going on here. So, this area has changed a little from what it was in the original game. The area itself hasn't changed, just these enemies have changed. Usually an Aldean Warlock would be here, guarding the Flame of Nito. But I guess that didn't attribute itself well to the logic of having an Aldean Warlock here, so they changed these enemies to Pyromancers, and I suppose that does make a little more sense. Although, in my opinion, these Pyromancers are just annoying as fuck, and I would definitely rather just have one Aldean Warlock here, rather than dealing with 3 of these Pyromancers. But anyway, we have another Melfinito to talk to.
Who are you? And what do you want from us? Melfinito, that is what we are called. My name? Do you mean our name? We know nothing of the outside world. We sing eternally for those who bear death and dark within themselves. We have been here forever. We know nothing of the outside world, and we do not need to. The little ones were born from the great dead one. And the great dead one taught us song. We have sung ever since, to comfort those bound by death and dark. This is what we were taught. You silenced that cursed singing. Please accept these as a thank you. Do you seek comfort too? You poor thing. Take this at the very least. This is all that we can do. The little ones were born, and the great dead one taught.
Alright, so she's basically just repeating herself. So, that flame there definitely looks like a great soul, and I mean, it looks like a great soul, and I think it is part of one as well. I think that is the Flame of Nito, if I'm getting that correct. And I think the Flame of Nito is a piece of Nito's soul that was either left behind, or it was, like, he fragmented his soul similar to the way Gwyn did in Dark Souls 1, and that is what created the Melfinito and the Finito. But none of this is source, like none of this is relevant anywhere in the game, and none of it is said directly, so it's all hearsay. But I think that is probably the best way and the easiest way to explain what that flame is, and why the Melfinito worship it. But for a second, let's go back to what she said. So she said that the little ones are born from the old dead one. So the old dead one is Nito, the little ones being the fireflies. So those fireflies were born from the soul of Nito, or the flame of Nito, whatever it is. And just to clear things up, the fireflies do actually have a name. They are even an item in the game. They are called bright bugs. I don't have any on me at the moment, but I can probably find one a bit later on when we do the DLC, and I will explain it a bit more then, and what they do. So yeah, hopefully I get around to that, and hopefully I remember. But apparently those bright bugs are born from Nito, just as the Melfinito and the Finito are. Another thing she said is that the old dead one is the one who taught them to sing. So not only did Nito give birth to their species and their race, but he also taught them what to do in life, and he gave them a purpose, as any good creator should. And for those wondering what the Flame of Nito actually does within the game, it is a human effigy in a sense. So when you're hollow and you have no human effigies in your inventory, you can go to the Flame of Nito and it will turn you back to being human. But if you even have one human effigy in your inventory, it will not allow you to use it. Now, some would see that as being worth the use of a Fragrant Branch of Yore to get up here to use that, but the only time I've ever had to use this was when I was first playing through the game, and I was so bad at it that I had to keep using human effigies, and then I eventually ran out. So yeah, I've learnt my lesson from that, obviously, and I have about 20 or 30 in my inventory right now. I think I've only used maybe 6 or 7 in this playthrough so far. So now that I have all those, this flame is essentially useless to me. I mean, lore-wise, it's pretty useless as well. It's never explained. I don't think it is, at least. I don't think it's ever explained. It's just there to be eye candy and to be speculated and theorized about, but it's never given any traction within the game world itself. But anyway, I came down here to get a weapon called the Manslayer, and it's a pretty good katana, mostly for PvP. For PvE, it breaks very fast and has very low durability. I think it only has about 60, or no, I think it has 20 durability actually. 60 is much higher than it has, and for that reason, it's just not good for PvE unless you imbue it with poison and then use it to poison a boss or something. It can be helpful then, but I wouldn't suggest using it for getting through levels or anything like that unless you have like 100 repair powders and it's your favorite weapon. If you are looking to use this weapon for a PvP build, one that I would suggest is the Spotted Whip, which you get from the Demon of Song's Soul, and the Manslayer, and dual wield those because they both have pretty high poison buildup, especially if you imbue them with poison. Then you can do pretty much another quarter of what it has already in poison damage, and that's pretty good. Like, you can poison your opponent in a matter of seconds if you're landing hits on them with both weapons. It's not a top-of-the-line build for PvP or anything, it's just a fun one that you could try out if you like using poison weapons. But as I said, I wouldn't suggest using it in PvE, because those weapons will break pretty much after like 3 or 4 fights. But anyway, let us move on over to the Undead Crypt. It's just a short walk from here, so it's not difficult to get to or anything, and there's a bonfire pretty much immediately after we get there as well. So this one here is basically, it's missable, and you don't need it unless you want this tower as a checkpoint for the Shrine of Amana. We also have another meeting with Aldia coming up, and I think it's probably the most lore-heavy Aldia gets out of all of his interactions, so we'll just wait and see what he says. I don't exactly remember what the talk is about, but it's to do with the light and dark, to do with what path you want to go down, etc. The basic Aldia talk. So yeah, we'll get into that in a second. But this is a very nice looking door for what leads to a crypt full of dead people. It would have been pretty cool if they made this door like the one up in that tower before, where you had to be undead, because only undead should be allowed to get into the undead crypt, so it would make sense if that door as well had to be unlocked by someone that was already undead and already starting to hollow. And I don't know why it can be opened by just anyone. Like, that doesn't really make sense. I mean, they do have a Cyan Knight there guarding the door, but I mean, it's just a door that can be opened by anyone essentially, so even that Cyan Knight could just take a break from his post and walk back in and just chill out. So I don't know, little game contextual things that I just overlooked. I mean, they're completely fine. Like, I don't think that's really necessary, but just if you're going for like small details like that, I think that could be that would have been cool to do. Anyway, we're about to have another chat with Aldia, but not before he pulls the same goddamn dirty trick he did last time.
You can't keep getting away with it!
Fuck Aldia.
I believe we've been acquainted. Young hollow, conqueror of fear. What drives you so to overcome the supposed curse. Life is brilliant, beautiful. It enchants us to the point of obsession. Some are true to the purpose that they are fulfilled, flesh and mind. One man lost his own body and had lingered on as a head. Others chase the charms of love. However innocent. What is it that drives you? Once, the Lord of Light banished dark and all that stand from humanity. And men assumed a fleeting form. These are the roots of our world. Men are props in state of life, and no matter how tender, how explicit, the lie will remain a lie. Young Harlow, knowing this, do you still desire peace? Venric, the near true one, is here, and not far off. But what is a king? You, neither born with greatness nor grounded in by the fates. What is it you seek? You cannot even say yourself. We shall meet again, young Harlow.
Okay, so now that that asshole is gone, let's talk about what he said. So he references both Vengal and a very vague sentiment of people that chase love no matter how elusive. So that could be in reference to a number of things. Zully the Witch and Alva the Wayfarer, the Princess and Prince of Alkin and Ven, the Old Iron King and Myth of the Baneful Queen, or even Lucatil trying to find her lost brother. There's so many stories about lost love and loves that are unrequited within Dark Souls 2 that it's hard to discern a certain one. But that being said, the one that Aldir is talking about here says that they were chasing love no matter how elusive it was. And that sounds to me like the Old Iron King and Myth of the Baneful Queen. Aldir then goes on to talk to us about how we should proceed. So he asks us what we truly want, if we want to continue or we don't really care. So I went with saying yes to wanting peace, because that's the dialogue that I wanted in this case. If you say no, it's basically sort of the same thing. He just has a runaround saying that it's kind of the opposite of that. So he says, well, Vendrick is still here, seek after it if you want, but, you know, you can do other shit with your time as well. So if you're saying no to him, this basically pushes you further towards the Dark Lord ending of Dark Souls 2. In a nutshell, he's basically asking if you want to relight the first flame and be consumed by it for peace, to prolong the Age of Fire, or if you want to let the flame fade out and let the world be consumed into darkness and chaos. It's still really unclear where the first flame actually is in Drang Lake. Like, people have assumed that it's the throne, but I don't know. I think the throne is just something that channels the willpower of the monarch into the first flame to keep it lit. Or maybe something like that. But it honestly makes no sense to me. Like, the first flame is not actually in Drang Lake, it seems, unless the first flame itself is the Farfire, which you use to get to New Game Plus, because that's how you start New Game Plus. You go to the Farfire, and you choose to start the next cycle. So essentially, it could be said that you're hurling yourself into the flames of the Farfire, and you are reigniting the flame, therefore starting a new cycle of light. But that technically doesn't make sense either, because at the end of the game, you either leave the throne room, or you step in to the throne and you are locked in to the Throne of Want. And if you're locked into the Throne of Want, you will still start outside in Majula after the credits have finished. So either path you take, you still end up at Majula after the game ends. So I don't think you being in Majula after the end of the game is canon. Like, that's just you using the mechanic to start New Game Plus, using the Farfire mechanic to start the next cycle of the game. And I don't think it has any logic behind it to do with the lore or to do with the game world. You just start in Majula after the credits because it's better than going straight to New Game Plus. People disliked that fact about Dark Souls 1. Like, as soon as you finish the game, you weren't allowed to go back to the hub. You went straight onto New Game Plus, and anything that you left unfinished, well, it was made redundant because you were onto the next New Game cycle immediately. So with that being said, I think the throne actually is the flame somehow, and the throne works as a conduit for channeling life energy into the flame.
Halt. Human, do not produce light. Light, and all those who bear it, are unwelcome in this place.
So, that's Agdane. He's actually a nice dude, and we're about to get his dialogue here, and he's going to tell us all about the crypt and about the Finito.
I am Agdane, guardian of the crypt. Countless dead rest here in peace, cradled by the comfort of dark. Light only agitates. We have no need for it here. I am a Finito. We weave death and watch over the dead. This task was granted to me by the one who gave us the first death. Countless souls rest here. Some of them from ages long ago. Some were rich, others poor. Some wise, some dull, but now they're all just dead. Did you come for him? The one called Vendrick. You will find him deeper inside. Many castle servants and the like have come to fetch their lord. But they rest here now, put to death by the king's own guards. Perhaps he's not in the mood for company. In the past, humans were one with the dark. The former king of light, he feared humans. Feared that they would usher in an age of dark. How queer you humans. How you go on, never separating truth from fiction. This place is welcome to all, provided due reverence is shown. Death is equitable, accepting. We will all one day be welcomed by her embrace. Tell me what you desire. Show me reverence, and I will lend you my hand.
So basically the Finito have a slightly different job to the Melfinito. The Melfinito sing to keep the dark at peace, but the Finito watch over and guard the dead. So the Melfinito make sure the dead are at peace, and then the Finito guard those that are at peace. And that is essentially Nito's legacy in this game. He left behind a species and a race that take care of the dead when he can't anymore. Also, what Agdane said about light, the same thing happens in the Undead Crypt as what happens in the Shrine of Amana. If you use light, all of the Grave Wardens will try to kill you. So yeah, don't light a torch if you value your life.
I am a Finito. We weave death and watch over the dead. This task was granted to me by the one.
Just making sure he didn't have any more dialogue, even though he just repeats himself after the first, like, 2 or 3 talk options. And I think that's good, because it keeps the Undead Crypt vague, but basically explained at the same time, along with the Finito, so it still gives us room to speculate and theorize about other things that go on here. Okay, so I wanted to talk a bit more about the not lighting a torch in the dark situation. So, in the original Dark Souls 2, there is a pedestal below me, and you can use a torch in that area to light up the Undead Crypt. And in the original version of the game, that had no consequences, and it felt a bit as if the warning about lighting up a torch in this place had no real gravity to it, because we could just light a torch up when we were outside Agdane's vision, and it would have no consequence at all. But I didn't realize that they actually put a consequence into this version of the game for lighting up that torch and that pedestal. So, for those that get kind of upset at me for doing so, I did not know what would happen before I lit the torch and before I lit that sconce. So, fair warning, something bad does happen, and you'll see it in a second when I go down there. Oh yeah, and when I'm recording this, it's also Halloween, so kind of fitting that we're doing the Undead Crypt when it's Halloween. So, yeah, spooky ghosts and ghouls for 31st of October doing Dark Souls 2. I think it's a pretty good time to be playing this level at least. And I also should have a video of the Binding of Isaac Afterbirth going up today as well. The video for this may not go up until the day after, because I wanted to do the Binding of Isaac as a special, like, one-off Halloween video, and that's probably why this video will be late coming out. But when I'm recording the commentary right now, it is October 31st, in Australia at least, so this one may come out tomorrow, and the Binding of Isaac may come out tonight. And I accidentally used a silver talisman there instead of a flame butterfly. But yeah, those should be the two uploads coming out in yesterday and today. And this is what I'm talking about. Something bad happens right now. Uh-oh. When light is revealed, the shadows rise. Fuck me. So, luckily these guys aren't too much of a problem. They're pretty easy to defeat, especially with the Red Iron Twin Blade. There is one of them later on that gives me a bit of trouble, but they're basically just melee shield fighters with a magic mace, so they can use sorcery on me, but it's pretty weak. One problem that I do have with this redoing of the monsters in the Undead Crypt is this guy, or rather these guys, the duplicates of Orma and Reeve. Now, this place made sense when there were just two of them, because having two of them would mean that those two are the original Orma and Reeve. But now they have duplicates in here, and it makes no sense anymore, because there is only meant to be one Orma, and there is only meant to be one Reeve. And I know I've already said it, and I sound like a broken record, but that is one of the things I dislike the most about Scholar of the First Sin. They've taken things that were completely fine in the original game, lore-wise and context-wise, and just turned them into nonsensical things that don't work anymore in the game world of Dark Souls 2. And every time one of these things comes up, it just pains me all that more to see that they've ruined just these little things that didn't even need to be touched. But anyway, let's get onto the lore of the Undead Crypt. So the basics, Agdane pretty much covered. The Undead Crypt is a place where all undead go to seek peace and rest. So that explains what Vendrick is doing here, it explains what Agdane is doing here. Technically, Agdane is not undead because he is a finito. I don't know if they can be afflicted by the curse because they are not human, but essentially the Undead Crypt is self-explanatory. It's literally in the name, the Undead Crypt, where all undead go when they feel as if they need to be put to rest. And since undead can't die, they just wander the Undead Crypt for all eternity. Since the Undead Crypt itself is so easy to explain, I'll dive into a few of the enemies that we'll find in this area, and I'll explain the context for why they're here and what their backstories are. So, first we have the Ladia Witches. They were once witches who worshipped the god of disease, Galib. They once resided in the Undead Crypt alongside the Finito, but over time grew conceited, misusing their power and usurping the control of the Crypt's gateway. Their actions spurned the Grave Wardens, and they were slaughtered as transgressors. Their spirits now forcibly serve as guardians of the Crypt. Next we have the Ladia Pyromancers, which are these things that come out of the tombs that I am breaking. So they are ghostly spellcasters of the Ladia Pyromancers. Although pyromancers in name, they were adept at a wide variety of magic, and in their conceit they once occupied the Undead Crypt. Their brazen misuse of death drew the ire of the Finito, who branded them as transgressors. The apostles were slaughtered and subsequently buried in the crypt alongside other occupants. So those enemies that belong to the Ladia group are basically transgressors of death, and for that reason they were killed by the Finito, and they now reside here as guardians as well. The next enemies to be explained are the Imperious Knights. These guys are literally what Orma and Reeve are, and this description literally states that there were 2 of them, and only 2. So there were no more Imperious Knights, or there may have been like a class of Imperious Knights, but they did not use shields. Only Orma and Reeve used shields. The Imperious Knight description goes on to state that long ago a pair of foolish knights attempted to conquer the undead crypt. These were Orma and Reeve. They each carried with them a great shield split into 2 halves, which they used in lieu of weapons to reduce their enemies to paste. Their ill-advised crusade came to an abrupt and unsuccessful end. However, as punishment, they were denied a peaceful death and instead put to work for eternity as guardians of the crypt. Now, it says there were only 2. Dark Souls 2, Scholar of the First Sin, puts in like 6 of them. It doesn't make sense. Why did they do this? I mean, if you're going to bother to put in such specific lore about something, at least follow it. Just follow the lore that you've written, because otherwise it is just a fucking mess. And also, I just realized that those enemies, those dark spirits, are dropping the insolent armor set. So there are in fact more insolent warriors, but that still doesn't change the fact that there are still more than 1 pair of Orma and Reeves in the area. Things are still askew with the lore, so even though that fixes it a little bit, like there are more insolent enemies, it still doesn't fix the fact that they have put in more than 1 Orma and Reeve. Also, I've noticed that the hollows in this area seem to stop respawning after you kill a certain number of them now. In the original Dark Souls 2, they spawned infinitely, and they pretty much never let up, so they followed you everywhere, and they would just keep spawning no matter how many you killed. So it's good to see in this version that they've put a limit on that. They've also added skeletons into the mix of enemies in this area, which I feel is a good move because that just gives us more variety in the way of enemies, and it also makes sense. So yeah, it's good to see that they've actually added things worth adding, rather than just adding things for the sake of making areas more difficult like they did with the Orma and Reeve duplicates. Also, for those wondering about these bells that ring, if you've never played through this area, or you're just getting to this conclusion now, these bells, when rung by the hollows that arise from the ground, summon the Pyromancer Ladia spirits from the tombstones. And this can be a real pain in the ass a bit later on when we have to jump down into a hole and there's a whole bunch of bells and statues. And you need to basically either get out of that area really fast or just avoid letting any hollows ring the bells. Because if you let any of the hollows ring a bell down there, you're basically going to get a non-stop barrage of the Ladia Pyromancers, and like an idiot, I accidentally hit the bell there. But to no consequence, because as you can see, I've already destroyed all of the Ladia tombstones. I think you can destroy the bells as well, but why even bother if all of the Ladia Pyromancer tombstones are already gone? And I think this might have been the guy that was giving me trouble, just because he was casting hexes and I had nowhere to get to him around the tombstones. And I'm just going to fast forward through this so we can get to the next invasion, and guess who it is? It is the Nameless Usurper. So if you haven't figured out who this Usurper is yet, I'm just going to tell you who it is right now, because we kind of need to talk about it. So in one of the latest patches of Dark Souls 2, it has been pretty much confirmed that the Nameless Usurper is Licia of Lindelt, and I'll read out to you the reasons why. Basically, on the wiki it says, the Nameless Usurper is believed by some to be Licia of Lindelt attempting to steal your souls. She uses a placeholder face due to the fact that her face is not meant to be seen by the player, and is almost identical in appearance to Merciless Rowena and other female invaders. So she doesn't use miracles, but that is probably because she is avoiding drawing the player's attention by using miracles. So if she used miracles and she looked exactly like Licia of Lindelt, we would be able to say for sure straight away that the Nameless Usurper is Licia. And the reason that she doesn't use miracles is most likely because of that fact, so we don't just jump to that conclusion. There needs to be some kind of like reveal that the game does have, like when we pick up the Cracked Eye Orb and then we walk down to where Licia is, it reacts to her presence, and that tells us that Licia has to be the Nameless Usurper that's been invading us. So in one of the latest patches, They made it so if you killed Lycia before you were invaded by the Nameless Usurper, the Nameless Usurper would not invade, and that basically confirmed that it was Lycia invading your world to steal your souls. And in a patch before that, that wasn't the case. You could still kill Lycia, and the Nameless Usurper would still invade, so that's why everyone thought that she couldn't be the Nameless Usurper. But in the latest patch, that has been redacted, and now if you kill her, the Nameless Usurper dies as well. And then here we have another set of Orma and Reeves. And these two were the original Orma and Reeves. These were the only two that were in Dark Souls 2 in the original game. So these to me are the actual Orma and Reeve. And since they were such unique enemies, it's a shame to see that they've just duplicated them for the sake of putting more enemies into the level. They really could have done that with any enemy, and I don't see why it had to be Orma and Reeve, because they basically just fucked up that whole piece of lore now and made it redundant, because there is no longer just two of them. But anyway, we've already fought like 3 of these guys so far, so I'll just fast forward through this fight so we can read the description of Reeve's shield. And I actually do have both the shields. They're actually quite hard to get usually. But anyway, Reeve's shield reads, "Shield of the knights who long ago attempted to conquer the undead crypt. They bore no weapons, only a shield split into left and right halves, which they used to playfully crush their foes until their corpses were needed beyond recognition." So each shield just says the same thing basically, and it just confirms that there were only 2 of them. So good job to whoever decided to put more Orma and Reeves in the level. You basically just screwed all that lore up. And so we come to the giant hole full of death. This is the hole that leads to the room full of tombstones, undead, and bells. So yeah, you can either get out of here as fast as you want, or you can destroy the tombstones of the Lady of Pyromancers before an undead can get to a bell. But unfortunately, yeah, I was too late on getting to that undead, so I just get the fuck out of there. And the way to get out of here is signified by this line on the ground on this pathway. But if you take any of the other paths at all, they all lead to dead ends, and therefore you'll be ambushed by the Lady of Pyromancers and blocked in to that dead end, and you will die pretty much instantly. Unless you have something like the Wrath of God spell, where you can just repel them all in one hit and kill as many of them as you can, if you have really high intelligence. But unless you have that, I think you're kinda fucked. Anyway, we're almost at the end of the undead crypt here, and the room that I go into next is kind of a bit of a change from what it was in the original game. Like, under this staircase there's a bell that has an undead that would ring it if you ran past him, and usually there was only one undead here, but I didn't realize that there were 2 more that spawned. Like, there's one of them that walks over to the left here, and he's a bit fucking sneaky. I just barely saw him, and unfortunately I rang the bell, so I have to go and redo this area by sitting at the bonfire. But before that, there is one thing I need to grab, and that is the shortcut to this area from the bonfire. If I didn't get that, I'd have to go through that whole tombstone part again with all of the bells and all of the Lady of Pyromancer tombstones, and trust me, nobody wants that. And also, if you're wondering what happens when that bell under the stairs rings, I didn't exactly turn around to show you, but it basically summons an entire row of the Lady of Pyromancers down that long hallway, and they will all come at you at the same time and kill you before you can even get to the boss door. At least that's my experience. I could never really get through that area without killing the thing that rings the bell. I'm sure you can, but I wouldn't suggest doing it when killing the guy under the stairs is just so much more easy. Anyway, I'm just going to skip to when we're back at those stairs, and we'll continue on to fighting Velstadt, the Royal Aegis. So this is 1. And there's a sneaky bugger, number 2. And then there's the sneakiest one, which comes up out of the ground after you kill both of those guys. And you gotta be really careful to kill these guys with the Red Iron Twin Blade because most of that weapon's movesets are wide swings, and only the one-handed R2, I believe, is the thrust forward. But anyway, there is one more new enemy in this area, and that is a Dragon Rider. So, I mean, I take back a little bit of what I said, like they are using Dragon Riders in more than just boss battles, which is good because that's what they should have been doing in the beginning anyway, because they aren't very intimidating enemies. They're just a different kind of stronger enemy than normal, and they should have been used like that in the original game as well. I'm glad to see that they did that in Scholar of the First Sin, and I mean, the boss fights with the Dragon Riders are still less than mediocre, but it's good to see that they're using them as normal enemies as well. It's also really good that they're using the Dragon Riders in the correct context as well. So they have a Dragon Rider here defending Vendrick's tomb, and that is one of the best places for it to be. There was another one earlier on in the Shrine of Amana as well, and that one was guarding Vendrick's soul. So the Dragon Riders only guard the most important things to their king, and the Cyan Knights sort of serve that same purpose as well, but in a different fashion. Like the Cyan Knights have been guarding the Sublime Bone Dusts, and they've also been guarding the King's Doors. So it's almost like each rank of the King's forces guards something different. So the Dragon Riders guard probably the second highest tier of what is important to the king, which is like the king's tomb, his soul, and Hyde's Tower of Flame, like locations. It's basically location, 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 but for Dragon Riders. And then Velstat, the Royal Aegis, guards the king himself, and then the Cyan Knights guard everything else. So it really all makes sense in the end, with these enemies anyway. I wish they would have done the same with every other enemy in the game, and made each enemy fit their context properly for where they are in the world and what they do in the world. But, I mean, we can't have everything we want. It's not a perfect world, especially in Dark Souls 2. I'm just going to fast forward through this fight with the Dragon Rider and getting to the fog wall, because I'm honestly running out of things to talk about to do with the Undead Crypt at this point, and all we really have left to discuss is Vendrick's Ring, Velstat the Royal Aegis, and then probably Vendrick himself. Although I won't fight Vendrick right now. I'll wait until I have all the giant souls so we can do it how it's meant to be done. But anyway, here we go. This is Velstat the Royal Aegis. Okay, so this dude, if I remember correctly, is weak to lightning, so that's what I'm using. And the lore around him is pretty easy to understand, I suppose, other than the fact that later on in the DLC we will see a duplicate of him in Shulva with Alana the Squalid Queen, but other than that, it's kind of easy to explain. So his name is Velstat the Royal Aegis. Aegis is defined as the protection, backing, or support of a particular person or organization. So Velstat is essentially Vendrick's #1 support, or his backup, his guardian in a sense. It's unclear where Velstat originated from, but one thing is for sure. He came to Vendrick from a faraway land with his brother, which was Raim. And Raim and Velstat eventually had a falling out, and Velstat became the king's #1. When it started out, Velstat and Raim were the king's left and right hands, and yeah, basically shit went down, and Raim ended up leaving the kingdom because of an altercation with Velstat and Vendrick. Since then, Velstat followed the king everywhere, and would do anything for him, as Velstat was one of Vendrick's most loyal knights, and his most favored, other than Cyan. So when Vendrick learned of Nashandra's plans, he took off to the crypt, and Velstat followed in tow. But then Vendrick decided to rip his soul from his body and separate the two. And since then, Velstat has stayed with his king to keep watch over his ring and his body for a very long time. Velstat originally started out as a miracle user, but since his inhabitance of the crypt has been so prolonged, his miracles eventually turned into hexes, and that is why he was using dark magic in that boss fight. But even though the darkness of the undead crypt consumed Velstart, he has not once left the side of his king. Anyway, that's all for Velstart, so let's see what the Emerald Herald has.
This ring is the symbol of the king. Use it to gain passage through the king's gate and venture to the far east. Bearer of the curse, if you are to be the next monarch, then one day you will walk those grounds without really knowing why.
Well, that is going to do us for today, guys, so next time we'll continue on with the Dragon Eyrie, Aldi's Keep, and the Dragon Shrine, and we're going to go grab the Ashen Mist Heart so we can go into the Giant's memories. So once again, hope you enjoyed the episode, thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.